Silence is not the absence of words. It is the presence of strategic power that most people abandon because they confuse emptiness with weakness. Let me submit to you today that the manufacturer never designed your mouth to run continuously like a broken faucet, leaking precious resources without purpose. You were created with a capacity for silence, and that capacity is not a flaw in your design, it is one of your most sophisticated features. But religion taught you to always have an answer. Society taught you to fill every gap with noise. Culture taught you that silence means you have nothing to say, and that lie has cost you kingdoms. That lie has cost you influence. That lie has cost you the very authority you were manufactured to carry. Because when you don't understand that silence is a weapon, you become a casualty of your own words. I want to challenge your thinking right now. The problem is not that you talk too much. The problem is that you don't understand what you're releasing when you speak. Every word you utter is a seed. Every sentence is legislation. Every conversation is a decree that sets things in motion in the invisible realm. And most people are planting weeds all day long, then wondering why their garden looks like a graveyard. You've been speaking death over your destiny because nobody taught you that your tongue is a manufacturing tool, not an entertainment device. The manufacturer gave you the power of speech to create, to establish, to decree, but instead you've been using it to complain, to gossip, to explain away your potential, to negotiate with your limitations. And then you wonder why your life looks exactly like your conversations. Here's what they didn't tell you. The person who controls their tongue controls their territory. The person who masters silence masters strategy. The person who knows when not to speak possesses a level of power that the constantly talking person will never access. Because silence is not passive, it's the most active posture you can take. When you're silent, you're observing, you're learning, you're calculating, you're conserving energy that weak people waste on worthless words. Silence is how kings gather intelligence. Silence is how the wise separate themselves from fools. Silence is how manufacturers test their product before releasing it to market. But you've been convinced that silence makes you look stupid. So you fill every moment with noise, trying to prove you have something valuable to say, and in the process you prove the exact opposite. Let me expose the lies you've been believing. You believe that if you don't speak up immediately, you'll lose the opportunity. That's a lie. Real opportunity doesn't disappear when you pause. It matures when you're patient. The manufacturer designed time as your ally, not your enemy. When you rush to speak, you reveal immaturity. When you wait strategically, you demonstrate mastery. Think about this carefully. Every premature word is an aborted destiny. Every hasty response is a forfeited kingdom. Every nervous explanation is authority being transferred from you to your audience. You're giving away power every time you speak before it's time, and you don't even realize you're doing it because you've been trained to believe that the fastest response is the best response. That's a lie that keeps immature people trapped in cycles of regret. You believe that silence means agreement, so you feel obligated to voice your opinion on everything. That's a lie. Silence means you're wise enough not to waste ammunition on battles beneath your assignment. Not every statement requires your correction. Not every error needs your input. Not every fool deserves your wisdom. When you respond to everything, you devalue everything you say. Your voice becomes common. Your words become cheap. Your impact becomes diluted. But when you choose strategic silence, when you let foolishness expose itself without your help, when you refuse to lower yourself to arguments that don't serve your assignment, that's when your occasional words carry the weight of wisdom instead of the noise of opinion. You believe that people will forget about you if you're not constantly making noise. That's a lie rooted in insecurity. People remember the person who speaks with weight, not the person who speaks with frequency. Think about the most influential voices in your life. Were they the people who talked all the time? Or were they the people whose words were so carefully chosen, so powerfully delivered, so strategically timed that you couldn't forget them even if you tried? The manufacturer designed influence to operate through impact, not volume. A whisper in the right moment changes more than a shout at the wrong time. But you've been conditioned to confuse presence with noise. So you keep talking, terrified that if you stop, you'll become invisible. Meanwhile, the truly powerful are becoming more visible through their silence than you'll ever become through your noise. You believe that silence is weakness, that it means you're afraid or you don't have a response. That's a lie that keeps reactive people trapped in patterns of powerlessness. The lion doesn't roar to prove it's dangerous, it roars when it's time to hunt. The rest of the time, it observes in silence while lesser animals chatter. Have you ever noticed that the most dangerous predators are the quietest? They don't announce their presence. They don't warn their prey. They move in silence, strike with precision, and dominate without discussion. That's strategy. That's power. That's the manufacturer's design for effectiveness. But you've been taught to roar constantly, so you've lost the element of surprise. Your enemies know your patterns. Your competition predicts your moves. Your critics have already prepared responses to your defenses because you're so predictable in your need to always have the last word. Here's the truth that will revolutionize your life. Talking is cheap, but silence is expensive. Anyone can run their mouth. It costs nothing. It requires no skill. It demands no discipline. That's why broke people do it all day. That's why people with no power compensate with volume. That's why insecure people can't stop explaining themselves. Go into any environment where people have no authority and you'll find noise, constant talking, endless explanations, perpetual justifications. Because when you have no real power, you substitute volume. When you have no genuine authority, you compensate with words. When you lack confidence in your position, you try to talk people into believing you belong there. But silence requires strength. Silence requires confidence. Silence requires a level of internal security that says, I don't need to prove anything to you because I already know who I am. The manufacturer designed you with this internal security, but you've been conditioned to seek external validation, so you keep talking, trying to convince people of your value instead of resting in your original design. Let me tell you something that will change everything. Secure people don't explain themselves constantly. Confident people don't defend their decisions endlessly. Powerful people don't need to announce their power. Their presence does it for them. And you, manufactured in the image of the Most High, were designed to walk in that same level of unshakable confidence. But every time you over-explain, you undermine. Every time you over-justify, you weaken your position. Every time you defend yourself to people who haven't earned the right to judge you, you transfer authority from yourself to them. Never ask the product what it's for, ask the manufacturer. When a car breaks down, you don't ask the car what's wrong, you check the manual. You are a product. You have a manufacturer. And he never creates without specific purpose. And one of the most overlooked aspects of your design is your capacity for strategic silence. Go back to the manual. Study how the manufacturer operated. The most powerful being in the universe spoke the world into existence with words, but he spent eternity in silence before he said anything. Think about that. Eternal silence, then strategic speech. He didn't speak until it was time. He didn't fill the void with nervous chatter. He didn't explain his plans to angels who questioned his timeline. He waited in perfect silence until his words would carry creative power, and then he spoke. And when he spoke, galaxies exploded into existence. Mountains rose, oceans formed, life began. That's what happens when silence precedes speech. The words carry force. And you, manufactured in his image, have that same capacity. You can choose silence. You can leverage silence. You can weaponize silence. But instead, you've been treating your mouth like it's a streaming service that has to produce content 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You're exhausting yourself with unnecessary communication. You're depleting your power with worthless words. You're sabotaging your own strategy by revealing your plans to people who have no business knowing them. And then you wonder why your life lacks the creative force you see in the manufacturer's operation. It's because you're speaking without the strategic silence that gives words their power. Let me teach you the principle of strategic silence. There are 3 types of silence, and until you understand all 3, you'll keep using your voice in ways that diminish your authority. Number 1, there is observational silence. This is when you close your mouth so you can open your eyes. Most people miss critical information because they're too busy talking to notice what's actually happening. They walk into rooms and immediately start performing, trying to be seen and heard, when they should be observing and learning. The smartest person in the room is often the quietest because they're gathering data while everyone else is wasting it. They're reading body language. They're noticing power dynamics. They're identifying opportunities and threats. They're learning who's really in charge and who just thinks they are. They're discovering agendas that people are trying to hide. And by the time they speak, they've gathered enough intelligence to make their words hit with surgical precision. Observational silence says, I'm going to watch before I engage. I'm going to learn the landscape before I make my move. I'm going to understand the game before I play my hand. This is how you avoid foolish mistakes. This is how you identify opportunities others miss. This is how you gain advantage. Because while everyone else is talking, broadcasting their positions, revealing their strategies, showing their hands, you're learning, you're calculating, you're preparing. And when you finally speak, you speak from a position of superior knowledge. That's not manipulation, that's wisdom. That's the manufacturer's design for effectiveness. Solomon said, a fool speaks first and thinks later, but the wise think first and speak strategically. Observational silence is the discipline of thinking first. Number two, there is protective silence. This is when you close your mouth so you don't give your enemies information they can use against you. Listen to me carefully. Not everyone deserves to know your business. Not everyone has earned access to your plans. Not everyone should hear your dreams. Because there are people who will smile in your face, collect your information, and use it to sabotage you. There are people in your circle right now who are studying you not to support you but to stop you. There are individuals who ask you questions not because they care about your answers, but because they're gathering intelligence to use against you later. And you, in your naivety, in your desire to be liked, in your need to be understood, keep giving them exactly what they need to destroy you. Protective silence is wisdom. It's discernment. It's understanding that your strategy is sacred and your vision is valuable, and you don't cast pearls before swine. You don't share your manufacturer's blueprint with people who are still trying to figure out their own design. You don't reveal your battle plans to people who haven't proven themselves on your battlefield. You don't expose your vulnerabilities to people who haven't demonstrated their loyalty. Protective silence keeps your enemies confused and your competition off balance. They can't stop what they don't know. They can't steal what you don't show. They can't sabotage what you don't speak. And I know this sounds harsh to people who've been taught to be transparent and vulnerable with everyone. But let me tell you something. The manufacturer never designed you to be an open book. He designed you to be a mystery that only the worthy can unlock. Number three, there is power silence. This is when you close your mouth because your presence is enough. This is the silence of authority. This is the silence that makes people uncomfortable because they're expecting you to explain yourself, to defend yourself, to prove yourself, and you just don't. Power silence says, I don't owe you an explanation. I don't need your approval. I don't require your understanding. This is the silence that Jesus demonstrated when they accused him and he said nothing. Not because he couldn't defend himself. He could have called legions of angels. Not because he didn't have answers. He is the answer. But because he understood that there are moments when silence is the most powerful response. When you defend yourself to people who have already decided against you, you give them power they don't deserve. When you explain yourself to critics who aren't genuinely seeking understanding, you waste authority on people who can't steward it. Power silence is the ultimate expression of confidence. It's the king who doesn't argue with peasants. It's the manufacturer who doesn't defend the product to people who weren't designed to use it. It's the master who doesn't need to prove mastery to students who refuse to learn. It's you walking in such alignment with your purpose that you don't feel compelled to justify your existence to people who don't understand your assignment. And let me tell you what happens when you embrace power silence. Weak people become intimidated. Insecure people become threatened. Controlling people become frustrated because they're used to people who need validation. They're accustomed to people who will perform on command. They expect you to dance when they demand entertainment. But when you rest in power silence, when you refuse to play their games, when you simply are without feeling the need to prove anything, you disrupt their control systems. And that disruption is often the beginning of your breakthrough. The wealthiest place on earth is not the bank, it's the cemetery. Millions died with books unwritten, songs unsung, inventions uncreated, businesses never started. But let me tell you what else is buried there. Millions died having said too much and too little at the same time. Too much noise, too little substance, too many words, too little wisdom. Too much talking, too little impact. Too much explaining, too little executing. Too much defending, too little dominating. Too much justifying, too little manifesting. Because they never learned that it's not about how much you say, it's about what you say and when you say it. They never discovered that the power is not in the volume of your voice, but in the timing of your speech. They never understood that one well-timed word is worth more than 1,000 poorly timed paragraphs. Everything God created is full but looks empty. A seed looks small but contains forests. An egg looks simple but contains eagles. A baby looks helpless but contains presidents and pioneers. You don't look like what you carry. And your silence? Your silence looks like nothing, but it contains kingdoms. It carries strategy. It holds power. It possesses authority. But you'll never access what silence contains if you can't bear to sit in it for more than 5 seconds without filling it with worthless words. You'll never unlock the treasures hidden in strategic restraint if you're addicted to the sound of your own voice. You'll never discover the force that comes from careful speech if you keep treating your mouth like it's a radio that must stay on all day long. Your job is what you're paid for. Your purpose is what you're made for. Don't confuse the two. You can be successful in your career, but fail at your assignment. Many people are climbing the ladder fast, but it's leaning against the wrong building. And one of the ways you're failing your assignment is by speaking when you should be silent and being silent when you should speak. You've got the timing all wrong because you don't understand the strategy of silence. You think your voice is your power, when actually your timing is your power. A word spoken at the right time is like apples of gold. in settings of silver. It's precious, it's valuable, it's treasured. But the same word spoken at the wrong time is garbage. It's worthless, it's wasted. The difference between treasure and trash is often just timing. And you can't master timing if you can't master silence. Think about a surgeon. Before they make the incision, there's silence, there's preparation, there's study of the anatomy, there's analysis of the condition, there's planning of the approach. A surgeon who cuts without this preparatory silence commits malpractice. But a surgeon who knows when to cut and where to cut and how deep to cut saves lives. Your words are surgical instruments. They can heal or they can harm. They can save or they can destroy. They can build or they can demolish. And the difference between healing and harming often comes down to whether you practiced preparatory silence before you spoke. Did you take time to think? Did you consider the impact? Did you evaluate whether this needed to be said at all? Or did you just speak because you felt like it? Because the moment triggered you? Because you couldn't control yourself? Consider the bow and arrow. You pull the arrow back. You hold it in tension. You wait in silence. You aim. You breathe. You focus. And that silence, that waiting, that pulling back, it's not inactivity. It's potential energy being stored. It's power being concentrated. It's force being gathered. And when you finally release, that arrow flies with velocity and impact it could never have if you just threw it. The pulling back is what gives it the power to pierce. The tension is what gives it the force to penetrate. The waiting is what gives it the accuracy to hit the target. Your words are the same. When you speak constantly, your words have no force because there's no tension, no buildup, no concentrated power. They're just thrown words, random thoughts, scattered opinions. But when you practice strategic silence, when you wait, when you hold back, when you let the tension build, when you aim carefully and then you speak, your words land with impact. They carry weight. They create change. They shift atmospheres. Because you understood that silence was not the absence of action, it was the preparation for explosive effectiveness. Let me tell you about a young executive I encountered years ago. Brilliant mind, Harvard educated, came from money, had every advantage. Got hired into a major corporation with tremendous opportunity for advancement. But he had one fatal flaw. He couldn't keep his mouth closed. Every meeting he had to prove he was the smartest person in the room. Every conversation he had to dominate. Every presentation he had to show off his knowledge. Every situation he had to have the last word. Every correction he had to defend himself. Every criticism he had to counterattack. And one by one, doors closed. Promotions went to others. Opportunities dried up. Relationships soured. Not because he wasn't qualified, he was overqualified. Not because he didn't work hard, he was the first one in and the last one out. Not because he didn't have ideas, his ideas were often the best in the room, but because he was exhausting. Because wisdom knew he wasn't ready for greater responsibility when he couldn't handle the responsibility of his own tongue. Because his inability to embrace silence revealed his immaturity more clearly than any performance review ever could. Years later, I saw him again. Different man, completely transformed. Same intelligence, same education, same work ethic, but now accompanied by something he didn't have before, strategic silence. He'd learned to observe before speaking. He'd learned to listen more than he lectured. He'd learned to let his work speak louder than his words. He'd learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do in a meeting is say absolutely nothing. He'd learned to ask questions instead of always having answers. He'd learned to make his words so rare that when he did speak, everyone stopped to listen. And suddenly, everything changed. The opportunities that ran from him when he was noisy came running toward him in his silence. The doors that closed in his face when he was loud swung wide open when he became strategic. The people who avoided him when he dominated conversations now sought him out specifically. Because the world is not looking for more people who can talk. It's desperate for people who know when to talk and when to be silent. The marketplace doesn't need more noise. It's begging for wisdom. And wisdom knows that silence is often the most eloquent speech. But here's what fascinated me most about his transformation. When I asked him what changed, what made him finally embrace strategic silence, he told me something profound. He said, I realized I was so busy trying to prove I belonged that I never actually demonstrated that I belonged. I was using words to convince people of my value instead of letting my value speak for itself. And the day I stopped trying to prove myself was the day I actually became the person I was pretending to be. Think about that. He was sabotaging his own destiny by trying to defend it. He was undermining his own authority by trying to prove it. He was diminishing his own value by constantly advertising it. And the moment he embraced silence, the moment he let his work and his character and his results do the talking, he became what he'd been claiming to be all along. Now let me show you something else about silence that most people miss. Silence creates space for revelation. When you're constantly talking, constantly filling every gap with words, constantly broadcasting your thoughts, you leave no room for the manufacturer to speak. You leave no space for wisdom to emerge. You leave no opportunity for insight to arrive. Because revelation doesn't come in noise, it comes in stillness. The manufacturer speaks in whispers, not in whirlwinds. He reveals in quietness, not in commotion. But you've got the radio of your mind playing so loud, the television of your mouth broadcasting so constantly that you can't hear what heaven is trying to tell you. And then you wonder why you lack direction. You wonder why you're confused about your next move. You wonder why you keep making the same mistakes. It's because you're not creating silence where revelation can enter. The prophet Elijah learned this. He was waiting for God to speak. There was a mighty wind that tore the mountains. God wasn't in the wind. There was an earthquake that shook the ground. God wasn't in the earthquake. There was fire that consumed everything. God wasn't in the fire. And after all the noise, after all the drama, after all the spectacular displays, there came a still small voice. And that's where God was. In the silence, in the whisper, in the quiet moment that Elijah would have missed if he'd been making noise himself. How many divine instructions have you missed because you couldn't be quiet long enough to hear them? How many supernatural strategies has heaven tried to download into your spirit while you were busy running your mouth? How many times has the manufacturer tried to correct your course while you were explaining why your course was right? Stop. Before I continue, I need to interrupt your thinking. Let me ask you something, and I need you to be honest with yourself. How many times have you spoken too soon and regretted it? How many times have you said something in emotion that you couldn't take back? How many times have you revealed your strategy to the wrong person and paid for it later? How many times have you defended yourself to critics who used your defense as ammunition? How many times have your own words become the rope that strangled your destiny? How many relationships have you damaged because you couldn't control your tongue? How many opportunities have you lost because you spoke before you thought? How many battles have you created unnecessarily because you had to have the last word? If something is stirring in you right now, if you feel that conviction, that recognition, that uncomfortable awareness, that's not condemnation. That's not the enemy attacking you. That's not shame trying to paralyze you. That's your potential banging on the door of your consciousness screaming, learn this lesson. That's your purpose demanding that you level up. That's your assignment requiring that you develop the discipline you've been avoiding. The graveyard is full of people who never learned to control their tongue. The cemetery is overflowing with relationships destroyed by careless words. The grave is packed with opportunities lost because someone couldn't be quiet long enough to win. Businesses that failed because the founder couldn't keep trade secrets. Marriages that dissolved because someone said the one thing that couldn't be taken back. Careers that ended because an employee couldn't resist the urge to tell the boss what they really thought. Friendships that died because someone revealed a confidence they were trusted to keep. And if you're still listening to me, if you're still reading these words, if you're still engaged with this message, it's because you refuse to let your uncontrolled mouth bury your destiny. It's because something in you knows you were made for more than being a casualty of your own words. It's because your spirit recognizes that this is the missing piece. This is the undeveloped skill. This is the strategic weapon you haven't learned to wield yet. And today is the day that changes. Today is the moment you decide that silence will no longer be your weakness. It will become your strength. So what do you do now? You cannot change what you tolerate. You cannot fix what you deny. The first step is waking up to this truth. The way you've been using your voice is not aligned with your design. You were not created to be a broadcasting station of noise. You were not manufactured to be a running commentary on everything that happens. You were not designed to explain yourself to every person who questions you. You were created to be a strategic releaser of words that carry creative power. Wake up to the fact that every time you speak without thinking, you're leaking authority. Every time you explain yourself to people who didn't ask and don't deserve an explanation, you're giving away power. Every time you defend yourself to critics who haven't earned the right to judge you, you're lowering yourself to their level and elevating them to yours. Wake up to the reality that your voice is a tool, not a toy. It's an instrument of creation, not an instrument of entertainment. It's a weapon of warfare, not a weapon of waste. The manufacturer gave you the ability to speak so you could decree things into existence, so you could establish kingdoms, so you could create atmospheres, so you could shift circumstances. But you've been using it to gossip, to complain, to criticize, to defend, to explain, to justify, to argue, to prove, to convince. And every word you've wasted on those worthless conversations is a word you didn't have available for your kingdom assignment. Wake up. Your voice is too valuable to waste on meaningless interactions. Next, you need to remember your original design. You're not trying to become silent. You're trying to remember that you were manufactured with the capacity for powerful restraint. Before you were conditioned by society, before you were trained by culture, before you were influenced by people who talk too much, Before you were damaged by people who made you feel like you had to defend your existence, you had the manufacturer's design inside you. That design includes the ability to choose your words carefully, to guard your tongue wisely, to release your voice strategically, to withhold your opinion diplomatically, to observe before engaging, to think before speaking, to consider before responding. Stop building new habits. Start recovering your manufacturer's settings, the factory settings that got corrupted by bad programming, the original design that got buried under layers of cultural conditioning, the authentic you that knew how to be silent without feeling invisible, how to observe without feeling overlooked, how to wait without feeling weak. You were designed to speak life, to decree truth, to establish kingdoms, but you can't do any of that if you haven't learned to shut up and listen first. You can't create with your words if you don't first receive from your silence. You can't speak with authority if you haven't first waited in humility. Remember who you were before the world told you who to be. Then you must decide. Potential without decision is just cemetery material. Ability without choice is just wasted capacity. Understanding without commitment is just information that goes to the grave with you. What separates the graveyard from destiny is one thing: decision. Will you keep wasting your voice on noise, or will you master the strategy of silence? Will you continue being reactive with your words, or will you become strategic? Will you keep explaining yourself to everyone, or will you start protecting your energy? Will you maintain your addiction to having the last word, or will you embrace the power of power silence? This is not a feeling, it's a choice. Decide today that you will no longer speak just because you can. Decide today that you will treat your words like the valuable currency they are. Decide today that silence will become one of your most powerful weapons. Decide today that you will observe more and broadcast less. Decide today that you will think longer and speak shorter. Decide today that your mouth will be under the control of your purpose, not your emotions. Because nobody can make this decision for you. Your spouse can't do it. Your mentor can't do it. Your pastor can't do it. Your therapist can't do it. You have to decide that your mouth will no longer be your problem. It will become your power. Finally, you must act. Knowledge without action is decorated ignorance. Understanding without implementation is just theory that dies with you in the cemetery. Awareness without adjustment is just consciousness that leads nowhere. Find situations where you would normally talk and practice silence instead. Identify conversations where you would normally explain yourself and just don't. Recognize moments where you would normally defend your position and choose power silence instead. Spot opportunities where you would normally give your opinion and ask a question instead. Notice times when you would normally fill the awkward gap and let the gap remain. Start today, not tomorrow. Not when you feel ready. Not when conditions are perfect. Not when you've thought about it more. Not when you've talked to your accountability partner. The graveyard is full of people who said, "I'll work on that later." Your assignment requires you to master this now. Because the problem you were born to solve requires a level of strategic communication that you cannot access until you learn strategic silence. The people you were sent to lead are waiting for someone who speaks with weight, not just frequency. The opportunities that are coming your way require someone who knows when to engage and when to observe. The next level of your destiny demands someone who can be trusted with secrets, who can hold strategies, who can keep confidences, who can wait for the right moment. And if you can't be trusted with silence, you can't be trusted with the level of influence you're asking for. Listen to me. I'm not speaking to who you are. I'm speaking to who you're becoming. I see it. Heaven sees it. The manufacturer sees it. The only one who doesn't see it yet is you. But something is shifting right now in this very moment. As you're reading these words, as this message is penetrating your spirit, as this truth is confronting your patterns, something is breaking. Something is changing. Something is emerging. You thought silence was weakness? Wrong. Silence is the posture of kings waiting to decree. Silence is the position of generals preparing to strike. Silence is the stance of manufacturers before they release the product. You believed you had to defend yourself to everyone who questions you? Wrong. You only defend things that are questionable, and your destiny is not up for debate. Your purpose is not on trial. Your assignment is not seeking approval. You assumed that staying quiet meant people would overlook you, forget you, dismiss you, underestimate you. Wrong. The lion doesn't have to roar for the jungle to know who's in charge. The king doesn't have to announce his royalty for the kingdom to recognize his authority. The master doesn't have to prove mastery for the students to know who's teaching. When you walk in your authentic authority, when you operate in your genuine purpose, when you move in your actual power, you don't need to say a word. Your presence does the talking. Your results do the speaking. Your character does the broadcasting. Your birth was not an accident. It was strategic, calculated, deliberate, intentional. Heaven had a problem that only your unique design could solve. That's why you're different. That's why you never fit. That's why normal conversations drain you, because you weren't manufactured for small talk. You were manufactured for kingdom talk. That's why surface level relationships bore you, because you weren't designed for shallow connections. You were designed for covenant relationships. That's why regular jobs frustrate you, because you weren't made for employment. You were made for assignment. You were manufactured to speak life. You were designed to decree destiny. You were created to establish kingdoms with your words. You were built to create realities with your voice. You were engineered to shift atmospheres with your declarations. And I prophesy to you today, the graveyard will not have your voice. Your words will not die unused. Your silence will not be wasted. Your strategy will not be stolen. Your timing will not be off. Your mouth will not be your downfall. Your tongue will not be your destruction. Your voice will not be your problem. It will be your power. This is your hour. This is your moment. This is your season. What you've been saying carelessly, it's time to speak strategically. What you've been explaining unnecessarily, it's time to guard it. What you've been defending constantly, it's time to rest in your authority. What you've been broadcasting freely, it's time to protect it. What you've been wasting on worthless conversations, it's time to invest it in your assignment. You have permission. You have authority. You have assignment. The manufacturer already said yes. Stop waiting for people to validate what heaven already authorized. Now go and master the weapon of silence, so that when you do speak, kingdoms shift, mountains move, atmospheres change, and destinies are activated. So what do you do now? Let me give you 4 clear instructions that will change everything if you implement them. Number 1, starting today, practice the 24-hour rule. When someone provokes you, when a situation demands what feels like an immediate response, when you feel the urge to speak right now, when emotion is driving you to say something, when your flesh wants to have the last word, wait 24 hours. Write down what you would have said. Type it in your notes. Record it in your voice memos. But don't release it yet. Let it sit. Let the emotion drain out of it. Let wisdom have time to speak. Let the manufacturer show you whether it even needs to be said. Most of the time, you'll discover that silence was the better response. Most of the time, you'll realize that what felt urgent in the moment wasn't urgent at all. Most of the time, you'll thank yourself for not sending that text, not making that call, not having that conversation. This trains you in strategic restraint. This develops the discipline of delayed response. This builds the muscle of thoughtful engagement. Number 2, identify 3 types of conversations you will no longer participate in under any circumstances. Gossip, you will not speak about people who aren't present to defend themselves. Complaining, you will not waste your creative voice on rehearsing problems without proposing solutions. Explaining yourself to people who haven't earned that access, you will not give detailed accounts of your decisions to people who aren't affected by them and haven't demonstrated they have your best interests at heart. These 3 categories of conversation drain your power and diminish your authority faster than almost anything else. They leak your energy. They waste your anointing. They sabotage your strategy. Cut them off completely. When people try to pull you into gossip, practice protective silence or redirect the conversation. When you feel the urge to complain, channel that energy into problem solving instead. When someone demands that you explain yourself, practice power silence or simply say, I'm not discussing that. Your refusal to engage in these toxic conversations will speak louder than any words you could say. Number 3, before every important meeting, crucial conversation, or significant moment, ask yourself this question and wait for a clear answer. What does silence accomplish here that speaking cannot? Sometimes the answer is nothing, and in those moments you speak with precision and power. But often, the answer will reveal that silence is the superior strategy. Sometimes silence gathers more information. Sometimes silence creates uncomfortable tension that forces others to reveal themselves. Sometimes silence demonstrates confidence that words would undermine. Sometimes silence protects strategy that speech would expose. Sometimes silence maintains mystery that explanation would destroy. This one question makes you intentional about every word you release. It transforms you from a reactive communicator to a strategic one. It shifts you from someone who speaks because they can to someone who speaks because they should. Number 4, study people who have mastered strategic silence and learn from their patterns. Watch leaders who know when to speak and when to wait. Observe how powerful people use silence to create tension, gather information, and maintain mystery. Notice how the most influential people in any room are rarely the loudest. Pay attention to how wisdom speaks less but says more. Learn from their example, because you're not just trying to talk less, you're trying to lead more effectively. You're not just trying to be quiet, you're trying to be powerful. You're not just trying to control your tongue, you're trying to maximize your impact. Find these people, watch them, study them, ask them questions about how they develop this discipline, model their patterns, adapt their strategies to your unique context. Because strategic silence is a learned skill, and the fastest way to learn it is from people who've already mastered it. You were not born to be a copy. You were born to be an original. And the world is waiting for what only you carry. The marketplace is hungry for what only you can deliver. The kingdom has an assignment that only you can fulfill. Your generation needs a solution that only you possess. But what you carry cannot be released through constant noise. It cannot be delivered through careless words. It cannot be manifested through undisciplined speech. It requires the strategy of silence. It demands the power of restraint. It necessitates the wisdom of timing. Die empty. Leave nothing buried. Give earth everything heaven put inside you, but give it with timing, with wisdom, with strategy, with the power that only strategic silence can provide. Your voice is a weapon. The manufacturer designed it as an instrument of warfare, a tool of creation, a mechanism of manifestation. Use it like one. Treat it with the respect it deserves. Handle it with the care it requires. Deploy it with the precision it demands. And remember, the most dangerous weapon is the one your enemy doesn't see coming, the one your competition doesn't expect, the one that strikes with perfect timing after perfect patience. Silence is that weapon. Master it, steward it, leverage it, and watch how everything changes when you stop speaking carelessly and start speaking strategically. This is your moment. This is your shift. This is your transformation. Now go and become the person who knows not just how to speak, but when to speak and when to strategically say nothing at all.